are now entering Maximum Driftcast, the only drifting podcast hosted by a Spanish soccer mom, a 30-year-old silver-haired fox going on 60, and finally, a 200-pound bowl of spaghetti with chimichanga arms.
Champions, we are the champions.
And welcome to Maximum Drift Games. I'm Brian Egan from Mondello Park. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have a crazy battle between James Dean, the Machine, and another Irish driver.
Your impressions are. I feel like the effort is going downhill, Paco.
Oh, well, I mean, it's hard to match the awesomeness, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't even Irish sounding.
Dave doesn't sound that Irish, actually. He sounds very, very normal. Not trying to say that Irish are not normal, but...
Well, I mean, you can understand them.
Well, either way, top of the morning to you, Dave.
We never get past that, do we?
No,
Damn
it's
It's never going to end.
Dave, I apologize for starting. We haven't had an episode start this rough in a very long time. I don't know what it is.
But it's true, though, because he is hailing via the Skype internet bandwidths all the way from Ireland, the land of Ire. And it's 2 a.m. there, and he's spending the very top of the morning, not the bottom, with us. And we're very grateful for that. So thank you for coming.
Thanks,
Also,
guys.
Dave,
What's up?
Dave, also, thanks for putting us on this beachfront property here. We appreciate you putting us up in this nice...
Spare no expense.
Dude,
Yeah,
no.
he actually flew us out to
Beautiful.
Ireland. As you can see here, the
Beautiful
sunny skies,
Irish
the crystal
beaches.
clear waters.
That does not look anything like Ireland. That could be the apocalypse in Ireland, and people would freak out if they woke up to that.
The cliffs just got eroded into sandy beaches. Yeah.
Yeah, we would be worried if we had a morning like that.
No top of the morning.
No, this is...
And also, I just want to. I don't know if you guys heard like a little bit of a deep voice, but I was watering my garden and I saw this guy doing push-ups across the street, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to come hang out a little bit?"
great.
And look at this guy. I found him in the street. What's your
that's
name, real quick?
crushing.
Yeah.
What's up, Robert?
Oh, hi.
So he's just gonna hang out with us for a
Sit
little
back,
bit.
enjoy the show, Robert. You can talk about vaping and anything else you want to talk about later on in the episode. But this focus right now is on this man right here, this beautiful lad, David Egan, who has been a leader, an innovator, a bodybuilder. What else have you been? You've been
Two of those things are probably true.
the
Competitive
bodybuilder.
eater.
Bodybuilding and
So, wrestling.
Following the Corey Hosford workout plan.
Yeah. Oh, dude, you've been quite the talk of the town the past few weeks.
Oof.
We only followed up with you maybe about a year ago. I'd say last time you were on was about a year ago, and that's when you were just cranking up the IDC, turning that up. Obviously, you were doing the BDC. Anything with a DC in it, you were probably doing that too.
I'd also like to mention that the last time I was on this show, you asked me, this was before James Dean had gone to Formula Drift, did I think he would do well in his first season? You guys where are we now?
Well, James
Yeah, we
Dean has had mixed success, I would say. So you're kind of right. I'm kind of right. He didn't win a couple rounds. So, I mean, I would say that we were both right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll agree to agree.
Yeah, I had the biggest fall on that one. I was the one saying, "Oh, you know what? He practiced at Modelo Park and he doesn't drive banks." And now I feel like a total jerk about it because I was way off.
Well, hold on.
And now he's
Peter
sitting on it.
has beaten him a couple times. So
Yeah, but I mean, the
there's
thing
that.
is, I think after his first round in Formula Drift when he won, I said the most apt thing, which was, America, he's your problem now.
Yeah. I think he said, America, get fucked. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Pretty
No,
much.
Something along those lines.
It's a very Irish way of saying it. So now we know.
But now, to be honest, as things have progressed, he's now everybody's problem. So,
Yeah.
egg on my face.
Well, he's been driving overseas with drift matches with you guys, and he's out there putting up a fight. But dude, you have some hitters out there. Holy shit, you guys have some drivers.
Yeah, to be honest, it's sort of, if you look at European drifting at the moment, it's the first time, I think, since the existence of drifting in Europe, that the best drivers from every single country have actually made it to the one series and have sort of got the budgets to battle at the top level. And it's kind of amazing to watch because, you know, over the years, if you watch Formula Drift, you kind of know who, you know, the big names are, the guys that are consistent and championship winners. In Drift Masters, you know, guys are just turning up from countries that you have never even heard of a drift series in, and just all of a sudden they're unbelievable. So it's got that kind of unpredictability and excitement that I think fans have enjoyed, that there's just random guys turning up and all of a sudden after a weekend they're sort of a household name in European drifting. But I think that's more to do with the fact that it's quite a fresh championship and it's still finding its feet and still finding its big hitters.
And so real quick, how long have you been running drifting organizations for?
I have been running drift organizations. This would be my 6th season.
6th season. So we've been doing it for 6 years, and you've been running, what, 2 different organizations at the same time?
Last year, I ran 5 championships in 1 year. So we ran an Irish Amateur Championship, the Irish Drift Championship, the British Drift Championship, the Emirates Drift Championship in the Middle East, and Drift Masters in Europe.
No big deal.
Do you have an identical twin somewhere?
Yeah. I looked about like 25 last year. I look about 45 this year. So that's kind of how it happens.
Between those 5 series, how many events is that?
I think in 1 year we did, I think it was 32.
32.
So 32 events, and that's probably within, what, a 7-month window?
The Middle East stuff is kind of in our winter because it's just too hot in there somewhere to run drift championships. So we would do that in sort of the January, February, March. So it kind of rolled into one circle eventually.
32 events a year, and on the road, busting your ass, you and your crew, running 5 organizations.
Just with a lot of help from other people. Yeah. But yeah, the core team is 6 guys. And they're all sort of friends of ours or guys that have come together in our Drift Games crew over the last 6 years. They've kind of added maybe 1 a year.
Oh, fuck. Okay. Unbelievable. You know, for us out here.
And also on top of that, these 6 guys ran 24 drift schools a year, did about 12 practice days or sort of open days, like kind of we have a partnership here with Club Loose and we do stuff with them. And we also ran corporate media as well, doing advertising for automotive companies, corporate stuff like that at the racetrack here in Ireland, and yeah, a host of other different things as well and in behind the scenes.
So now that you obviously you ran that for 6 years, things are changing for you quite a bit.
Yeah, so we sort of announced, I suppose out of the blue, that we will be stepping back from running the competitive side of Irish drifting as of next week. So next week in Mondello Park is the final of the Irish Championship and Drift Masters in one weekend. And it will be the last time I will run a national championship in Ireland. So last year I stepped away from the British Drift Championship and it was handed over to a guy called Matt Stevenson, and he's doing a great job with it. He's got a lot of new ideas and he's having a great time. And this year I'll step back from that. And I think more than likely all of the championships that we ran 5 years ago, bar Drift Masters, we will no longer be doing.
And do you guys already have somebody in the role to keep IDC running? Is that kind of the plan?
Well, I think the best thing that I could probably do is explain to you, which a lot of people will obviously have assumptions and
for sure
ideas of why I would make a decision like this. And it's funny because sometimes I read the comments and sometimes I go, wow, I never even thought about that. Or I could say, I wish that was the case or whatever. So I think it's probably easier to clear up because now I'm obviously not running any championships. I can obviously be a little bit more honest and not as a marketing spiel as you would be. So I think the best thing to start with was where we started off was, so 6 years ago. So I've been involved in Irish drifting for 10 years this year. So I did 4 years as the commentator of the championship. And then I did maybe 2 years as a driver. And then it came to a situation where so pro drift was what Irish drifting originated from. So when James Dean and all these guys, Dean Carney and stuff, were originally driving in Ireland. They made their name in a series called Pro Drift. So Pro Drift was like the big deal at the time. It was a very good championship. And the owner of Pro Drift was leaving the country, so he decided that he wanted to bring the Pro Drift brand with him when he was going to the Middle East. So he decided to change the name of the championship to the Irish Drift Championship. And for the first year of the Irish Drift Championship, it was run by his uncle, who is Kieran Hines, who is the current head judge of Ireland. It has been actually the longest serving judge, I think, in world drifting. It's something ridiculous. So he took in for a year, but while he had the skills maybe to organize the events and have them run smoothly and be judged great, he wouldn't be a guy who was so comfortable with the marketing side or the promotional side. So I was at that point, which is 6 years ago. I just finished sort of college, and I was sort of trying not to get a real job, and kind of sort of semi-unemployed, I would say is probably the right word. I was DJing, and I ran a DJing company for a while, and I wasn't really too sure what I was doing with my life. And then this opportunity came up that, there was an opportunity that this Irish Drift Championship brand was sort of in the mix. Nobody really wanted to do anything to it. And I said, this could be a really good opportunity. So this is, again, stuff that we would keep from fans, or because again, fans are protected from the business side of they're not there to listen to business stuff. They're there just to watch the action and have fun. So this is kind of going behind the scenes. So what a lot of people thought had happened was that I had bought the Irish Drift Championship. But what I hadn't done was buy the Irish Drift Championship. I had bought the rights to the name, the Irish Drift Championship, and the logos and everything to go with it. Because obviously, I don't have a lot of money. I don't have the money to buy out the championship at the time, So I said, look, it's the best way I can do is sort of pay a fee back to the original owner of the championship. So that was a perfect deal at the time, because it was quite a small clubman series. So you're like, it's going to cost about 70,000, 80,000 euro a year. Maybe $100,000 a year to run this, and we'll get the driver entries and we'll get the sponsors, and it's quite a simple thing. 5 rounds, go by the book. So obviously we took that deal, and it was a good deal at the time, and we were sort of franchising that name. Now at this time, you've got to remember, it was a very simple championship. There was no official photographers or videographers. There was no live stream. There was no Instagram account. If you can think back that far, there was no YouTube account for that championship. There was nothing. It was just a clubman series. There was no big names or anything like that. So it was just a simple thing. So obviously, me being me, I started to I love drifting so much. I wanted to sort of prove a point of how big it could get. So within 3 rounds of starting, never running any event ever before that, we started to do live stream. We brought Daigo Saito. We bought all these guys. And within 1 year, we Vaughn and Chris Forsberg and all these international drivers. And I sort of went a little bit out of hand with it in 1 year. Mm-hmm. And it sort of sparked off this kind of sort of next 5 years that it kind of kept growing and growing. And we weren't doing it so much for a financial reward. We were sort of doing it for the love of the sport, firstly, and obviously sort of an element of Ireland being an underdog, small country, not a lot of resources. If we could do it, anybody could do it. And we kind of had great drivers at the time, like James Dean and Jack Shanahan and Dwayne McKeever coming through. So there was lots of excitement about these talented guys, and we were making new tracks and doing crazy stuff. So as that went along, that was a success. Now you got to remember, at the time when I took over Irish Drift Championship, it had about 7,000 followers on Facebook, and that was the only social media it had. So it's hard to imagine it then.
Right.
Fast forward, as time goes on, we start to build a huge fan base. We start to build a lot of sponsors. We start to build a lot of steam. So this thing goes from, $100,000 a year to maybe $500,000 a year in terms of running costs and balancing the books, but not making a whole lot of money. And about, halfway through that journey, we realized, well, if we wanted to make it really good, we needed full-time staff members, because you can't just have people do an hour in the evening just to make sure, to keep your social media going for what the fans were demanding from us. So we started to hire full-time guys, but we realized, well, if we're only doing a season from, April to September, what are we all going to get paid when it comes to September to March? Because obviously there's only 6 months of the year when you're actually making revenue. Right. So we said, let's expand a little bit. And then as it happened, we started to move into some commercial work. We started working on the Middle East stuff. We started just kind of expanding out, and more people would join the team as this happened. And then sort of in the middle of all that, I got a call from the guys who were running the British Drift Championship, and they had sort of got to a point where they were sort of, got to the end of their road. They'd done it for 10 years. They were like, we kind of want to step back from this. Do you want to take it on? So we said, why not take on another championship? So we were kind of doing Ireland and the UK and the Middle East at the same time. And all this was pretty good. So the issue that happened was, what was probably the big stirring of the pot was last year when I changed the name from the Irish Drift Championship to Drift Games, which a lot of people would. And there was a couple of reasons for me to do that. The number one reason was that I was now approaching 5 years of running the Irish Drift Championship, and I'd spent about, let's say, somewhere between 3 and 4 million euro, but I didn't own the brand or anything to do with it. So when I got to that point, I was like, well, at some point I could just be like, turfed out of this, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I brought this to 240,000 followers and millions of views and millions of Instagram hits and everything. So I was like, okay, I was then sort of informed that I wasn't in a position to buy the championship, even though I was happy to pay for the championship that I had sort of grown. I just wasn't in that position. So I said, as you're getting older in life and you want to have a little bit of security, you're thinking, look, this is probably an opportunity to say that doing another 5 years of this is probably not the right thing. So we went to change the brand, and in changing the brand, we had a little bit of freedom, and we said we could try and maybe come along the lifestyle end of it, which is something that we were a big fan of, and we were running the Drift Games brand at the same time, but it was more chilled out, relaxed, non-competitive events, non-competitive days, just fun times and party times and content. So we did a little bit of that, and we had a lot of fun making the content for that. That was when we really started to find another thing, because we'd done a lot of events and now we were getting to this point. So then as this year sort of progressed, I was thinking, there's a lot of stuff that I think probably, your fans or drifters or everybody probably doesn't realize that can become quite a weight or a stress on a promoter of an event. So I think I'll probably ask you guys the question of, like, what would you consider to be a successful drift championship? Like, what would you think that entails?
Success based.
I love it.
I mean, they're successful in that you have a bunch of people watching, but that doesn't necessarily make it successful in the eyes and hearts of the creators that are passionate about it. But I mean, if you have the successful drivers showing up, I guess that's another meter. But
I'll say something.
Yeah.
I'll say you create an ecosystem where both the organization and the drivers have a sense of stability showing up to your events, while being able to create and make new resources to make it financially stable, but also make it a lucrative long-term deal.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing that I think drifting has a misconception. From my perspective of talking to so many people in the game, a lot of drifting is spoken about in terms of how happy are the fans and how happy are the drivers. But I think it's very rare that it's asked the question of how happy is the promoter, who's actually really taking the biggest gamble or the biggest risk of critique when they actually put that together. Because from a promoter side, nobody is a promoter except the one promoter generally in one country. So there's no relative term for it. There's a lot of drivers in every country, be they grassroots or right to the top of Formula Drift. There's a lot of fans from all over the world, but there's very few people that are promoters. So it's very hard for a normal person to know whether it's successful or not, whether you're watching something that's successful because you want it to appear successful, or are you being fooled into thinking it's successful when really behind the scenes there's a lot of difficulties. And I think if you look at a successful championship, I think it's generally the one that people think or assume is very successful. And that may not be the actual reality, but if somebody like is promoting a championship and they think, and everyone thinks it's totally stable, then they're doing a phenomenal job, because I can tell you for a fact, every championship behind the scenes is not totally stable. So if that is the case, I think people might take for granted that things will just continue forever. And I think that's a promoter's job, is to take away all of those sort of worries and hardships from the financial or organizational side, away from the drivers and away from the fans. So they have to just worry about what's on track.
And it also seems like for some reason it is wrong for promoters to make money. Like, I mean, if for whatever reason a promoter wants to make a living out of making events, now you're going to get a shitstorm of hate, because how dare you make a living out of something that you love?
Well, I think that comes from not generally people having a problem with the promoter making money. It's the problem of trying to make money in drifting full stop, right? That's the first thing. And drivers can always talk about how difficult it is for them to survive. Fans, are paying for a product, so they expect a product back for that. Whereas a promoter generally doesn't ever speak about any financial woes or problems, unless they're a small-time promoter, because they're so afraid that in speaking of any financial problems or any issues they may have, that the whole thing will just crumble down because they have to be the strong leader in that pack. And I think some ways people can misconstrue that silence and sort of blind faith and all that kind of stuff for it's so easy and they're just making lots of money.
So I want to ask you this then. What, over the 6 years to 10 years, depending on if we go back to when you originally first started, what were some of the headaches that you felt that just kept you up at night and drove you to the point of insanity? Because like you said, it is a lot of the issues is the promoter happy, or is the promoter going to have an organization tomorrow? I'm sure there's some, we've heard some of Jim's stories. The other guy's like, hey guys, I don't even know if we can make it next year yet, but I have a few bucks on my pocket. We have 3 events left, and we'll figure out how to get through this year. What were the biggest hurdles that you've had to overcome to make sure that the series was still running?
I think the biggest problem is probably you're very silenced on your opinion, because you know that there are so many people you're responsible for. So if you think of the eco structure of a drift championship, you have a promoter who creates the events. And
right.
At those events, there are drivers who are maybe gaining sponsorship, or at least spending a lot of money on their car to make sure this season happens, or their sponsorship is coming through for the season. You have a lot of venues, you've got a lot of media personalities that are hired or work at drift events. You've got so many hundreds of people at the event. Then you've got all the fan base behind the event. Then you've got the beneficiaries of every person that ever sold a wheel or a spoiler or tuned a car for that event. So when you look at that triangle that you're sitting on top of, there's thousands of people and probably millions of dollars sitting underneath it. Now, what you don't want to appear at any point is weak or under pressure or about to crack. And that can be a very weighty thing, because if a driver has an issue or a fan has an issue or anybody has an issue, people are very sympathetic. But however, if you're a promoter and you have an issue, everybody panics. Everybody just runs around saying it's all about.
Well, that's the captain of the ship saying like, "Oh shit, we might be sinking." Then everybody on deck's like, "Oh fuck, we're sinking." So you're the dude that's like, "Yep, we're fine. We're cruising along, boys." Everything, and deep down inside, it's like, "Holy shit, it's about to go down."
And what can happen then is you're giving an impression, because you're a promoter of the sport, that everything is great all of the time, forever, and everything is just fantastic all the time, which is obviously a very difficult facade to play all the time.
Well, I was going to say, you did a hell of a job. You've done a hell of a job.
Where I've been sitting in the tower, calling, commentating on the event, and I'm hyped about this battle that's about to come up, and you get a text from the gate saying, we're going to lose 25,000 euro today. And that's just the way it is. You've just got to do another 16 battles after that, knowing that your team's put in, 8 weeks of effort, you put a load of risk on the line, and all of a sudden you're sitting there going, right, we need to go now and do more work to pay off the work that we did for this event. And you can't say that to anybody. So it's a very difficult position to be in. Your core team know, but you can't let anybody else know because they would panic. So I think the difficulties over that time is that you sometimes have to pretend or put on a brave face when really you need help and reinforcement from the people in the community to know that it needs to go. So you're in a catch-22. If you appear weak and you tell everyone we need more help, they'll maybe misconstrue it saying he just wants more money. He just wants more stuff through the gate. He's just trying to get more money. Or, you've given this perception of a championship that looks $1 million, but is probably losing money in the process. And you're speculating to accumulate for the future, which can happen in a lot of championships and a lot hoping that in 5-10 years they do. But then you will also get the fans that then have their misconceptions of it's all about the money and the sponsors. And I mean, I always say, if you're saying, it's all about the money, if someone says it's all about the money or the judges are biased, it's the two laziest phrases on the internet for drifting. It really is, because they're just go-tos for a bit of reaction. And I think over those years, you can't really, again, if you appear successful, for example, Ireland is a good example, and I could be truthful about this. For the past, I would say 2 years, Irish drifting has not paid me or my staff €1, €1. Everything that we have earned as a wage or as for ourselves as a wage during the year has come from external work. Most of it that we do for companies like BMW or whatever, and we don't advertise it. Why would we? We wouldn't advertise on a drift championship that we're doing work for other people. So people would just assume that the championship is paying everyone's wages and it's making money, when it may not be the case. Now, that's not me saying that there's any sympathy for that. Always remember that the promoter made the decision in the first place to do it, so that's absolutely their responsibility. But I think it can be a difficult position at times. And, you know, when you get to a certain element of perceived success, drivers want more, the fans want more. They want Mad Mike at every single round in Ireland. I mean, that they say that all the time. And Mad Mike isn't like, you know, $10 to bring there. So people don't understand. They just, you're making so much money. We want the entire FD grid. We want the whole D1 grid in Ireland at every event. We want 72 widescreens. We want it free in. No the drivers pay any entries. And eventually you're already sitting there going, this is a sort of an impossible task to keep everybody happy because they want more and more. Now, we had a good job of speculating to accumulate. We did it as much as we could, and we had an amazing time doing Irish drifting. But I think the reason that those difficulties come to an end is that it's not about the financials for me, because I could still afford to run the championship. It's not about the criticisms. It's not even about the bad. I think it's more that it's very difficult to spend a very long amount of time in charge of an awful lot of people with very high expectations without it taking a certain amount of energy away from you. And I think that if you're in an impossible task, if you look at Ireland, it has the same population as London. It has very, very small automotive industry. We sold, just to give you an example, if you were, say, Ford was to come on board with IDC, they sold 4 Mustangs last year in Ireland, right? So that's where we're at here. So promoting the Mustang to them is irrelevant. They're, you know, that kind of stuff. And then venues and insurance companies and that kind of stuff will always try and charge you more every year because they think you have it. So will a lot of the subcontractors. So eventually it becomes quite a stressful environment. And
so Ireland, real quick, more about Camaros, obviously.
that was 7,000 Camaros, but just
7,000 Camaros. and also because you know, you also like to talk in long blocks, like we also do. Just to comment on the monetary thing, it's like obviously we get it to some extent, but we also don't get it because this drifting podcast we do every week makes us rich as fuck.
That's true.
We are rolling in the bazingas.
You're sitting on a beach every week, so
yeah, this is. Yeah, thanks for flipping that bill for us, man.
Once a week,
you did.
2 hours at 6 p.m.
Sorry.
I think the transition of just to finish up on why I've kind of walked away is that, you know, two most like I would say probably critiqued areas of drifting are promoters and judges, right? They're the two positions that you will never have a good time if you're either of those, because, you know, and I think the way I would look at it is, and this is speaking for any promoter of any championship in the world or any judge, that there's no way you would do either of those jobs if you didn't love the sport more than your own self-interest, because it's just too much to take. You have to really believe you're doing the right thing, and you have to look at the bigger picture, of course. And I think if from where we're changing, we didn't want to stop our Drift Games brand because we wanted to continue that in the exact way we wanted it, because we wanted that to be a lifestyle brand where if you look at a driver or a YouTuber, you have this is the difficult thing to explain, but for example, if you're the only professional drift series in a country, for example, Formula Drift being the only professional drift series in the US, or Drift Masters in Europe, or BDC, IDC, or whoever it was, you sort of become like the government of drifting.
It's true.
Because people don't have an option, right? Because they either do what you want to do, and that's not because you decided that. That's because nobody else wanted to compete with you at any point, or they didn't feel necessary. So you become the government, and then people don't like the government because they tell them what to do. Nobody has a good word to say about the people in charge of them. You become a boss. And I think that becomes very corporate when we're not really corporate people at all. You know, that kind of way. So it's like you come across as a corporate businessman when really you're going, I'm not making any money out of this, but I'm having a great time and everyone's having a great time. But people say, oh, I don't like the way drifting in Ireland it's gone. Like, that's just because we only run a championship and nobody else does.
Yeah.
And the problem there is when you look at a YouTuber or a driver, the fan has a choice to either watch that driver or support them, or support somebody completely different, or not watch that YouTuber. And there's an element of the people who follow them are fans of theirs, whereas people who follow drifting have no choice but to watch their national series, whether they're a fan of that series or not. And that can sometimes lead to a lot of negativity of people who are forced to watch a sport that they're not particularly in agreement with, but they have no alternative. So they sit around on the fence, maybe poking fun at the championship, but reality is nobody has competed with it because maybe the reality is it's not easy to compete or not a lot of people want to do it.
I've not really thought about that government analogy before, but that's also excluding national borders. You know, it's like you could say in Ireland you only have this, in America you only have this. But it's like now, granted, it's a lot harder to physically get to a international event. It's kind of like you're not limited anymore with like what you want to watch, and we've always been agnostic in our stance. It's like we don't have to say like I only like grassroots drifting, I only like Formula drifting. It's like we can like it all, man. Like I'm totally excited. I've been following more of your doing Driftmaster stuff. Obviously huge into FD, and this whole show is mostly based in FD. It's like we can have it all, which is what's cool. And I think that, granted, you are definitely true. I think in America, it's like it would definitely help if we had more major organizations to choose from. But kind of like our other major sports and racing, like there's not like NASCAR 2. There's not like the NBA 2. And like granted, there's minor leagues and bigger leagues, but like there's only one premier league for these things. But
I could flip that around probably on you, Sam, and say maybe you would say that a competitor for Formula Drift, everyone would say, oh, that would be a bad thing for Formula Drift. I would say that you have no idea how good or bad Formula Drift is unless there's a competitor, because they would in the same space trying to achieve the same thing, and you could turn around and go, Formula Drift is unbelievable compared to something else. But if you've no comparison, you can only compare with other places in the world that may be under a different demographic or economic structure or limitation.
Well, I'll bring up an example to that, because as of recently, I say the past 3-4 years, we've actually had some organization that is able to compete on the same level as Formula Drift, and that would be Grid Life. And I don't know if you obviously haven't made it out to a Grid Life, which you should. You really should.
I really want to. It looks amazing.
You've been to obviously quite a few Formula Drift events. We've seen it at Irwindale almost every single year. But it's not a direct competitor with Formula Drift, but it's definitely another organization within drifting that gives you another outlook like, oh shit, there is something here in this party drifting community that you don't get in Formula Drift that you can only get here. But there's things over in Formula Drift that you can't get on the other side. So it's exposing the drivers in the audience to the two forms of drifting that is now really booming. And we've had drivers actually spoken with them, privately on a personal level. But it's like, yo, do you know what, this party drifting, the exhibitions, the demos, the 10-car trains, the media, Grid Life is great. I love it over here. I think I want to migrate over to Grid Life just because it fits what I like as a driver. But then you'll have people come over on the Grid Life side. It's like, do you know what? I love Grid Life, but I want more competition. I'm the dude that wants to chase a trophy.
I want to be able to prove that I'm better than you.
Yeah. So then that's when they go over there. But before that, we never have had any type of options as far as, well, which direction you want to go? Do you want to go to the party drifting, party boy route, or do you want to go chasing the trophy and standing on the podium route? Which now I would say both of them are finally two organizations where drivers have a sense of sustainability as far as getting sponsorships and partners on board to sponsor either or. Because before it was, yo, we're running Formula Drift. There was your opportunity as a driver to get a sponsor. But even now, for like myself, I only run Grid Life because don't get me wrong, I love Formula Drift. And if I can go back, I would compete in Formula Drift any day of the year. But as of right now, what I'm doing, Grid Life fits my package better. Because what I'm doing is I'm not giving ride-alongs. I'm not doing exhibitions. I'm not doing demos. I can give sponsor ride-alongs. I could, do better activation of the pits with partners. That's just how my organization works. It just doesn't work over in the Formula Drift side. So before that, it was like, well, shit, okay, well, how do I give ride-alongs to my ambassadors in Formula Drift? I have all these partners I work with. So it's like, what are you doing now? But now we finally have an option. I think both organizations, I think they need each other. They absolutely need each other. I
can't imagine a Grid Life without a Formula Drift.
Absolutely. It would not. See, Formula Drift does a phenomenal job at solidifying drivers as professional drivers. If you're in Formula Drift and you're competing, now to Drift Masters, you're in the top 100 of professional drift drivers in the world. Before, we look back before IDC, BDC, we had Formula Drift as the only championship. Well, once again, we may have 40, 50 pro drivers that were licensed show up. So that at one point, we only had 50 pro drift drivers around the world that were actually competing in an organization. Now with all the organizations that you started, we may have 300, 400, 500 to 1,000 licensed or professional drift drivers now. So that whole program has been expanding. But Formula Drift literally solidifies, or professional drifting organization solidifies the drivers being an asset, being a competitor. He's a professional. It takes a lot different criteria to being one of those competitors, more so than, a grid life guy. But a grid life guy is somebody who can go out there and worry about putting on a show, link up with his 5 guys and do a next entire tandem train all weekend long and get all the beauty shots. They can be the dudes with the drone in the car and they throw it out the window to get killer content. That gets 1 million views. So it's just 2 different walks of life that you do things over here that you can't do over here, and you do things over here that you can't do over here. It's a balance that is really broadened the sports in America, and they definitely need each other.
And to quickly
I would completely agree, and I think from my perspective, sorry, Sam.
Only one line, just before the show, we're also saying it's also a lot easier when there's someone above you doing it, and like you're coming up to chase the person at the top versus being at the top. It's a lot easier to make those decisions and the harder calls when you're the hungrier person below. In regards to having just one organization and a second one is showing up in places that other organizations have been as startups. Just something we mentioned that I think definitely applies.
I think the balance is absolutely correct. And to bring my full circle of why I've decided to step away from competitive drifting in Ireland is that I also want to do both. I want to have my Irish brand that's all about just ripping cars, having fun, enjoying partying, enjoying, everything there is about cars on a broader scale without having to be so serious about running championships. And then there's another part of me that wants to be part of a very serious championship like Drift Masters or something like that. I think what we ended up doing was doing so much of the serious stuff that it can get very stressful when you want to do a little bit of the fun stuff and a little bit of the creative stuff and the stuff that you can be a little bit controversial and risky and just have a good time. And then you switch that over to the other side. And I think if you look at Formula Drift drivers that I can see from this side, they're striking that balance too. Like if you're a successful driver, you look at James Dean, super competitive driver, and Peter, but they have their fun vlog that they have a good time on and have their fun times. You look at the likes of Blackout with Forsberg and Turk, it's their kind of fun time, and then they have their serious race days. And I think everybody needs that balance. And I think what we had done over time was tip that balance far too much into this just stressful thing, which then makes drifting very much sort of feel like a job then, and then you sort of start to lose that enjoyment. So what we want to do is have a Drift Games brand that is simply just our crew enjoying themselves, checking out events, driving cars, having a good time, running non-competitive events, and then have another side, which is our serious side. And obviously with Drift Masters, we found that new challenge. So, that's kind of the balance. Instead of running 5 championships, just run one and then do a lot of fun stuff. So even though we're stepping away from the competitive side in Ireland, we're going to offer people more of the grid life side in Ireland for all the drivers that have been there. And again, it's much more of a fun vibe.
I also want to bring up...
And I was going to say, what are Drift Games? But Corey, finish
your... No, I want to keep elaborating on this just a little bit more.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is like looking at like IDC, which is, once again, it's a top-tier drifting organization. You look at the cars now that are competing. It's sequential transmissions, 750 horsepower 2JZs. The cars that you're building now are cars that would be sustainable in Formula Drift. Once again, look at James and Peter. They're bringing over their S15s, which are very similar to cars at one point they've competed in over in Europe, and they brought them over here and dominated. Now, if that is the only product that you are selling to these viewers or future drifters, it's going to be a lot harder for these younger guys to step up and jump in, knowing that they have to invest a hell of a lot of money and resource to be able to be relatively competitive in such a series. So by running strictly just a pro organization, it limits the growth for the future of drifting, because sometimes people want to buy an S13 with an SR and run 15-inch wheels and not do crazy suspension and not run a winners or not run a sequential. But for me to come out to IDC, I need that to compete or to be relatively competitive, because that's what the top guys are running. So what could have happened is if you were actually we're going to sustain this, you may have got 2-3 more years down the road before you're not getting the new drivers come in, because it's very difficult to jump in as a guy with not many times to practice, not, the resources to build a car. The sponsors are already thin because you're limited on the drivers and the companies that are out there. That within 3-4 years, it could have started plateauing or going down because of the resource that it takes. It's like we're very fortunate and spoiled here in the United States because we literally have a drifting organization on an amateur level in every single state, which brings 20 to 30 amateur guys, which is literally just go do hot laps. You know, we have hundreds of racetracks across the United States. So for me to go to Ireland and driving a drifting organization, what's my option? My only option is IDC. That would be very hard for me to get into.
I think, and that's very much what we want to do is step away from the top level, let somebody else come in with that hunger and that drive, and come in with fresh ideas and do things differently to us, because that's always a good thing for drifting when it sort of changes and evolves and there's new ideas and a new story, and sometimes even just a change of I say ownership, but I'm not technically selling the championship, but again, someone is coming in to run it. They'll come in with a fresh look, and it can re-energize things that people will go, oh, what's going to happen next? Let's go and support this. This is a new thing. And we're going to sort of fall down the ladder a little bit and start working on the grassroots element and starting to build this training and practice and trains and having a good time. And, use our expertise at the top level to nurture the people at the bottom level and make sure they're having a good time so that they have plenty of options to stay in an SR20 on 15-inch wheels for 10 years if they want, because there's enough to do. But if they want to succeed and go further, we can step them in the right direction and they can go to that top tier. So we're sort of taking a role reversal, which is very exciting for us because it's a new challenge. It's something different, and it's a lot more sort of relaxed and a lot more fun, and we can be a little bit more creative. So it's again, as you said, it's trying to nurture that level at the bottom to make, the next James Dean, the next Jack Shanahan, that's the plan.
So I have a question for you too, regarding IDC then. So if you have this young kid who's motivated, wants to get into drifting, which you've developed and bred a lot of youngsters into drifting over in Ireland, and we've seen them develop over the past few years. We actually literally seen them go from their teens into their 20s in your organization and become champions. I've seen some of the best driving from some of the youngest people in your series. But if I was a new guy out there in Ireland and I wanted to compete, what would it take me for me to go out there and compete in IDC? Can I just show up, pay an admission, and then go compete? Or is there any type of licensing you needed to get? But what were the requirements to become a driver in the series?
Yeah, so we had 2 championships this year in Ireland, which was a Nationals Championship, and we call it Nationals and Extreme. But the Nationals Championship was our amateur series, which we ran 4 rounds of. And that was the experimental series where we put every driver on the exact same tire, and it was all road tires. So they had a road tire that was really cheap because they were buying them all in bulk as one driver group. And let's be honest, Pro-Am drivers generally don't have a full tire deal as it is. So they were all running these tires. There was one driver who did 3 rounds on one set of tires, and he came 5th in the championship. Now, let's remember that it does rain quite a bit in Ireland too. But
yeah,
it was very achievable for him. The guy who won the championship, he won like a €10,000 prize, and he was in a BMW M3 estate. Well, a BMW estate with an M3. So it was like a 280 horsepower car on road tires. And he won the championship. He got some support to go forward and compete. And now he's competing next week as the champion of that amateur at the biggest event in Ireland ever, which is next weekend. So there is that element. And there's a guy in Ireland who he has refused in the last 8 years to spend more than €5,000 a year on drifting. And he hasn't been outside the top 5 in pro for the last 5 years. So it's still very achievable if you're a good enough driver in Ireland, because the tracks aren't as big as some of the tracks in the US are.
Okay, so I want to dig into this a little bit more because I want to get I want to understand this whole little ecosystem that you have. So if I were coming in to compete in IDC at the more top tier level, what would be my cost to compete in your series? What would I be looking to spend?
Yeah, so the entries are about $1,500, so $1,500 for the year, for the pro championship. And the biggest thing about cost in Ireland and why so many internationals have come is that every single track is no more than 2 hours away from you. And if you live on the east coast of the country, they're probably 45 minutes, all 3 different venues. So there's not a lot of traveling. So say you're an international driver, you would just find somebody local to one of the tracks. You've got 45 minutes from every track. It's a lot more achievable to do a full 5-round championship. You could be talking, it would fuel and tires and, your car, that's as far as you want to go. But from a basic competitive level, I think you could run a full pro championship in Ireland for about €7,000 to €10,000. So maybe what, $8,000 to $12,000.
So I would pay €1,500 for registration, which that's 4 events.
That's 5 events.
5 events. So that would be. Let me do this.
You can do it.
So basically, I'm paying $320 per event to come out and compete. What obviously pit passes per team, right? You have to buy pit passes or hard cards.
That's all given to you for free.
So basically, I pay $320 per round.
That's why you don't have any money, Dave.
Yeah,
I think I'm
come
trying to
on,
figure this
wake
out.
up, buddy. I am just okay. So I pay $320 and I bring my 6 crew guys in. I'll bring Sam and Paco as my backup security guards because I definitely need security guards and body doubles.
/ fluffers.
/ fluffers. And then the other expenses would be my fuel, tires, and transport.
Yeah.
So I could literally do a weekend if I were to bring my car out. Okay, so I'd be $320, unless I've been 300 in fuel. I'll bring $1,500 in tires. I can do an event right around $1,800 to $2,000 times 5. That puts me right about $10,000, which would be about €9,000 to €10,000, like €8,000.
And you're probably going to get 2 wet rounds, so you're not going to use any tires at 2 rounds.
Every round is a wet round for Corey.
So were people okay. Once again, I'm just comprehending this. I don't think people realize how much it costs over here in the United States to run, because it's a shit ton, a lot more money than that. Okay. Because in some cases, like for example, I'll give you an idea. I'll just be wide open with you guys. So we live in California and Arizona, right? We go to Atlanta for Grid Life, and we go to Michigan, which is about 3,000 miles. Just alone to get fuel from my garage to over there, I spent about $1,800 round trip just in fuel. So I spent $3,600 just in fuel USD to go to both 2 rounds, not including the other expenses, which if you look at registrations or pit passes, every crew has to pay a pit pass, which could be anywhere depending if it's a 2-3 day event. If you're buying a Formula Drift hard card, that's the amount of money. So you look at crew expenses, another $1,500. And then you have hotels, which I'm sure in Ireland, everything's driving distance from your house. So you usually just crash at your house and wake up. Hotels, 3 hotel rooms for 6 guys. You're going to be looking at another $1,500 to $2,000 in hotels. So you could be spending, and I have spent, $8,000 per event.
I think in Ireland, remember Ireland is a national championship, so Europe would be a lot more expensive.
Yep.
But I think I probably could guarantee that you could buy a professional car, compete for a full season in Ireland for a roundabout, and be relatively competitive. I mean, be in the top 20 for about €25,000, including the car.
Damn it.
I think we found out why you weren't making any money.
But then I would still have complaints of those prices. But again, you've got to look at the scale. These are normal 9-to-5 guys who are not highly sponsored. So you can't price people out of the game.
And at the same time, I mean, like trying to be a little bit more objective. Like we don't know how the economy works in Ireland or Europe. I mean, it fluctuates.
It is very
in
different.
a very different way. Yeah,
it is very different. And I think but we can still vouch that there's people out here in the United States that are still paying out of pocket, that are still working the 9-to-5s to do this, and they still make it work. So I think it is relative in the sense that it is a similar situation. It's just that we do have, yes, more resource over here for the top dogs to get the money to go do this on their own. But there's still, we can look at the ratio of how many drifters are in the United States versus how many drifters are in Ireland. I guarantee you, for every 1 Ireland drifter, there's 25 American drifters for every 1, just because we have the resource to do that.
And you also have population. And
population's much bigger.
Yep. But the simple thing is that Ireland was always a very cheap place for a driver to go and learn his skills. Yep. Like we have a driver this year who's from Holland. He ships his car over. He gets an Irish guy to run the car and his team and everything. He just flies in and does the events. And he's up against good competition. So before moving to Drift Masters, he would learn these skills against, let's be honest, some of the best guys in Drift Masters anyway, who are in Ireland. And then he would be able to say, right, instead of spending a huge amount of money going around Europe, I can test my skills here. It's same judging system, same sort of style. And then I can see if I'm up to that level before I make that jump. So it's been useful for a lot of people. I'm just going to have to excuse myself for 2 seconds. I'm just going to go grab a charger for this laptop before
go grab it. Cool.
He's totally going to fart.
Yeah, he's gonna just step away and just blast.
This is
Charger
actually
my
perfect because
ass.
we have super chats. We got some super chats that aren't directly questions for him. We'll ask the super chats that are. But the first one was Global Media Inc. Says another great guest. Hit that like button, and also the real Drift fans and community appreciate your time and effort. I guess I should read that one for him while he's back here.
Yep.
Sorry, guys.
No
All
problem.
good. We understand you get gassy and you gotta do the thing, step away. Corey usually farts directly onto the mic, but then he regrets it later when he has to then smell.
I have to talk back into it. Yeah.
Before
blow that head
we
gasket.
continue, we want to read some YouTube super chat questions. If you guys have direct questions, comments, concerns, you can always go to the super chat on YouTube, and we will make sure to get to those. Global Media Inc. said another great app, and they also said the real Drift fans and community appreciated your time and efforts at Dave Egan. So it's very nice. Mike Lake also says, how important is a good digital marketing strategy, investment, and great content to the success of an event like IDC?
I'll tell you the one thing that also has become quite a stress for drifting, which probably nobody is talking about, is how much it costs to promote an event these days. I mean, I think you'll all notice how difficult it is to actually push anything on any digital platform now without spending a lot of money. So we were at a situation in IDC where we were thinking, so what we do now is we create really cool content, which we pay someone to make. Then we have to pay people to watch it. And it becomes sort of this diminishing return, because back in the day, say 5-6 years ago, you could just put up something cool and it would go. You would just do 100,000 views because it was a cool piece of content. You put a lot of creativity into it. Now, it doesn't really matter how cool or creative it is, as long as you have to push. And I think the bigger your following, when you get to the hundreds of thousands like some professional championships have, it's very difficult because they expect you to pay a lot of money to get to all of those people. So that can sometimes be very, very difficult when you're a small championship. And I would always say IDC or Drift Games Extreme was a small championship. It's national. So it was like, we were going, the first year, I think I spent maybe €200 in a year on Facebook promoting events. And I think this year it would be like €25,000. So that's a big jump in cost that doesn't really help the drivers or the championship or the fans. It just allows you to get the message out there. So having a good digital marketing strategy of knowing how to spend that and what's the best return is something I think every championship's had to learn, and every driver probably now as well.
Yeah, Facebook and Instagram have learned very quickly how to hold us by the balls to make sure we get these good. It's like I want to create to equate to my world a little bit. It's like I really want to create this cool fucking video, and I know it's cool as fuck, and I know people would love it, and it's an interesting concept. But if I want to guarantee it gets 1 million views, which is what the client wants to see, sometimes you just got to spend a couple $1,000 because otherwise Facebook won't show it to people. And it's like it's such a shitty thing. It's like they know that you're a company. They know you push cool content, but they also know that, hey, if you want people to see your stuff, you're going to have to pay us.
Hey, Robert.
And that's just like the way it is.
Robert,
there's definitely videos that go viral on their own, and it's usually user-generated content. But like if a company, for example, wants to post a video and they want to make sure it gets seen by all the people, you got to start shelling out the thousands.
Robert has a quick question here.
Interesting that
second.
Drift Masters this year, sorry, I was just about to say.
Drift
Masters this year is completely different to that. That is a completely organic platform, which we've been just sitting back going, how is this doing it on its own?
Yeah.
There has been about, I would say, an entire season, maybe €100 spent on Drift Masters, which is ridiculous. Awesome. When you look at an Irish national championship, having to spend 25,000 to get out to Irish people, and then Drift Masters kind of organically doing it, but that just goes to show Europe population versus Irish population, I suppose. But digital marketing and marketing, it started with drifting that you just have to be really good at running events. And now nobody talks about how an event runs anymore because everyone has kind of cracked that to a certain extent over time and experience. Now it's about how you push it. So I think it's a very important thing, but it is also restricting the way the world is now.
Yeah. That goes to show that that population, and I guess the worldwide population, is hungry for that existence, that content. And I remember, of course, being in the scene, heard about Drift Masters years ago, but now it seems to be coming to fruition in a very neat way.
So real quick, on that, have you noticed a different response going from like the IDC professional drifting more over to drift games? Have you noticed a new spark kind of fire up within the community and the drifting organization out there?
I mean, I think change is good. I mean, from my perspective, I've always changed things all the time, sometimes to people's annoyance. But I think I think the idea is that if you ever leave something so long that it's predictable, like, I mean, drifting should be a very unpredictable thing because it's a very unpredictable sport. Anything can happen. Everybody's got crazy cars and crazy personalities. So if something ever feels like it's not pushing in the right direction, I feel you have to change it. Even if sometimes it's change for the sake of change, sometimes people need that spark to even have a discussion or even disagree with you, or just feel something about it. You need to have sort of controversial stuff. And I think over the years, we've changed names, we've changed tracks, we've changed from top 23rd to top 24s to one more runs to everything. We've tried everything just to keep it changing. And you're always changing it too, because you're never confident or arrogant enough to say you've cracked the perfect code. So you're saying, well, if I'm not, hugely successful here and everybody's not sponsored and it's the biggest sport in the world, we must keep changing things all the time. So yeah, we changed a little bit this year. Some of it worked, some of it didn't, but that's the same as every other year. Just you take with you the things that did.
All right, I'm going to ask you something.
Wait, Corey, hold on.
What?
Robert had like a quick question before we change topics.
I mean, kind of something just to add on. So, I mean, primarily what I've done over the last couple of years is doing a lot of this digital media marketing. I mean, that was even my last position that I was at, in the vape industry. What I've noticed, I know, vape life, what's that? But what I've noticed is there's two ways how to really make media start to take off. So there's one with an organic response, and one of that being reactive rate per minute. So when you have a post that becomes a dead post, like say there's only 1 like, 2 likes in an hour, it's going to go to the bottom of the algorithm. One way how to boost out of that algorithm is obviously you pay to Facebook to basically blast that out a little bit more or give you a little bit more freedom so that it's able to, in a sense, not get bogged down by the other posts that are being put up every second. So what I've noticed is if you find a couple people that right off the bat are willing to like and share your post almost instantly, that post will always do way better than, regardless of the content, just because you have that initial boost and it gets you back into the top of that queue.
But do you know what I would say to that? Is that's the difference between like very fun organic content, the very first I'm putting out a promotional flyer, right? Mm-hmm. I think a photo of a flyer saying come out to IDC this weekend is going to get a much different response than David driving his Mustang topless, with his seatbelt titties hanging out. Woo! That's probably going to get a much more funny organic, which is going to boost that immediately. But it's like, once again, back in the day, like David said, back in the day, you could post a flyer and say, hey, come out to Modelo Park, and it would just fucking take off because there's nothing monitoring or sensing that. But now it's like anything with writing on it is immediately, like, literally chopped off the block, put at the bottom of the totem pole.
Literally the algorithm detects text on the images.
Yeah, but that's another thing too, is finding ways how to change that fun content into the advertising content, like sneaking it in.
Yeah, which I think that's kind of what
thing that you have to work harder now. It makes everybody more creative, and everybody has to go a little bit outside of the box, and it pushes people on a little bit.
Yep. No, that's exactly it. Is now you have to have a media team, pretty much, is what you're saying. Yeah. You have to have a
expensive, but it's also the only way to do it, I think, now as well.
So I want to ask you, because right before this conversation, we were discussing about all these changes you used to make in the series. If you could change one thing about Formula Drift, what would it be?
About Formula Drift?
Yep. If Jim and Ryan were to hand you the keys today and say, all right, Irwindale's yours, change a couple things about it, what would it be?
I mean, from my perspective, I think it's very difficult for me to say. I'm not pleading the fifth. I'm just saying I don't know. Like, I'm experienced enough to know that whatever way it is, it's that way for a reason. And it's not like I could come in with a magic thing and they would go, oh, we never thought of that. I mean, I'm sure they have explored every avenue for everything.
Let's assume that you're not wearing your promoter hat, though, and you don't know shit about the internal workings from an outsider's perspective. What would you want to see differently? Because we're going to corner you.
Because I'll just tell you right now. Once again, we've already talked about this before. I would change the live stream, right? That's one thing. I would change that right away. There may be some rules that you like that FD still incorporates that you've changed and found much success at. You can change something as simple as a track or layout. But what's a few things, if you could say a few things, that you would change immediately that you think would just help that platform a little bit?
I think the only thing that's difficult with drift events, and I think it's the only thing that we've strived in Drift Masters, which I'll be honest, may not work in Formula Drift because it's a different scene, but is the delays and the time scale of an event. So what we've done is we got rid of 5-minute rules. We made everything snappy. If you're not on the line, forget about it. And we would have a sort of a sharper show that doesn't have as many delays. I understand that in Formula Drift, there is those delays for certain reasons because of, commercial reasons or sponsorships or partnerships, and also to a certain extent to try to get there. And I can understand the opposite argument of giving them a little bit of a chance to get back out to the track. So both ways, if you want a faster show, it's a harsher show. And I think some people would prefer it to be that way. And then some people would also prefer it to be, fair on the drivers and a little bit more forgiving. I think from my perspective, I've always been kind of harsh on the drivers. I've always said the show comes first and the drivers come, it's all about how good a show it is all together. But I think in Formula Drift, they have far more budgets going in, that there's a lot more factors that you have to take into consideration. So that would be one thing from my perspective, but I know there's huge limitations on both sides there. So it's not like it's a solution. It's just, I've always said drifting is too fucking long. Like it goes on forever.
Yeah,
so like,
I definitely experienced that at a recent round where
But
what do you do when someone dumps oil on the track and you've got to shut down the track for 45 minutes?
Well, I mean, we just would check them before. Again, that can happen, but that's something you can't avoid. But then we would try and have some content we can go to kind of cover that over, or whatever, be highlight reel from another round or something. But I think generally the 5-minute rules, the delays, they're trying to keep it as fast as possible. There's for instance, in Drift Masters, I don't think it's actually visible, but the judges have a time limit of how long they can make that decision. And then they said that was unfair, but then they gave them a full replay system that they have on their own that's completely independent to what you're watching. So they can just rewind every camera to the exact point and get a quick decision, and then it just moves. And also, it has a director and a producer that they're not drift fans, so they just wanted to move as fast as possible and be as entertaining as possible. Whereas some of the hardcores might want a little bit longer. That's probably the only thing. Everything else, to be honest, as I said, from Formula Drift's end, they were the leaders in this. They still are.
You said something, and you said you like running a very harsh, quick show, and you're harsh on the drivers. A show first, drivers second. Without the good show, or without a show, there would be no drivers. There would be no spectators in the stands to support the drivers. So I could see why you said show number one, because without that interest of the audience and the viewership and the spectators, everything else would crumble.
And I also think when it comes to rules and regulations, you can have too many, because then what happens is there might be too much discussion over a rule or a protest or whatever. The rules are just black, white, super harsh. It looks like it's being really harsh, but what it does is it stops any gray areas, so that you end up in a situation where people are questioning calls or whatever may happen. There were some battles this year in Drift Masters that were completely destroyed because of the rules. There was one battle in Poland where Connor Shannon came to the line. He was doing donuts warming up, and the exhaust hanger on his car just came off out of the competition. But his exhaust just came off one of the hangers. So it can ruin things just as well as it can save them.
Because there is no 5-minute?
He is no 5-minute. He was just out.
Yeah, okay.
So he was lined up for the battle of the day against Peter Viansek, 15-year-old kid from Ireland, and everyone's pumped, 15,000 in the stadium. Exhaust falls off. See you later.
I mean, in all fairness, if you're driving a pro series, your car shouldn't be having parts falling off, right? So.
Yeah, and I think he clipped it on like he was doing donuts, and he just clipped the exhaust on like a tire or a barrier on the edge of the track, and this is the kid that won the event the year before. But you can look at it sometimes and go, that's horrendous. And then sometimes you go, well, if it was, if it moves the show at, twice the pace, then is it a good thing? Again, who has the answer? Again, we don't know which is the best way. I mean, there could be both. The answer
in my business is called, hey, that show business, baby. And then it's screwed. I don't know.
But at the same
I hate
time,
that term, but it applies so many times. It's
at the
like,
same
man,
time,
that's the sport.
we had cases like, for example, last event where Matt Kaufman, after being defeated by the 5-minute timeout clock once or a couple times, he finally got to beat it and end up running it over. That was like great content, like it was.
The price of that clock was well justified because it was hilarious.
Absolutely. That was awesome. And everyone has always wanted to destroy that clock. So,
I think at
the
this
clock
point
is pretty hated.
it's gonna become a tradition now.
yeah.
But I think again, Formula D are trying things. And Drift Masters are trying things. All these different championships are trying things. Even the FIA are trying things. So again, I think what really comes together is that nobody knows what the perfect formula is, but I think you've got to keep tweaking it until it gets closer at least. So there's no point in saying there's a right and a wrong way. We do our shows a certain way that we believe, and I think other championships do the same. And I suppose in the end of the day, it's easier for Drift Masters because all of the drivers are new, like first day at school. So if you tell them that's the way it is, they don't have anything else. They don't know any different. Whereas if you're trying to evolve everything like Formula Drift, I'm sure there's much more stubbornness there as you go along to fight against.
You can't just make a big change overnight. Everyone will lose their shit.
Yeah.
Well, now what's going to happen is when I do a burnout in the IDC burnout box and I knock my exhaust off, I'm like, fuck this. I'm going to go to Drift Games because they don't fucking care. They let me drive whenever I want with my exhaust falling off, and they let me.
Yeah, I mean, in Ireland, they can't be that harsh because technically these guys would cry if their exhaust fell off. But at the European level, they know it's that high stakes, that everything is high stakes. And I think that's a good way for the grid there to be, is that they all understand that there's no fucking around here. If we mess up once, we're out. And I think that makes it nearly more exciting too, I think.
Wow. Okay. No, I think once again, I would say over the past 2-3 years in the United States, we've noticed a big difference in the European drifting organizations, and obviously you've had your hands in all of it. And we were talking about this earlier. Your live streams have been absolutely incredible from the commentary, and you're doing a lot from our perspective because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. But our perspective, you're always creating content if you're at the track, or if you're not off the track, you're doing, the drift games in the studio. You're interviewing drivers. You're constantly producing the content. No matter where you're at, which is also making it more entertaining for us because now we learn about these guys. Before this, the only opportunity that we've had to learn about a driver is what the interview we caught in the 2 minutes that you put a mic in their face at the event. And for us, like our big thing behind the podcast was there is so much character and personality in the pits, and there's so many unique stories in the drivers that they don't get enough airtime to explain who they are, why they're driving that car. Why is their car this color instead of that color? Tell us your story coming up there. And it was like, that is what really intrigued us about doing this, is because there's so much more behind it that you can't get on a full scale at the event. And we noticed you finally, like, you're digging in these European drivers that were like, holy shit, that guy has a badass story. Now he's more relatable to us. Now I watch this guy that I never heard of before.
But I think that comes from a victim of circumstance too, because I think Formula Drift has something that we would be super jealous of, which is you guys have a lot of drivers that make very good content on their own. Mm-hmm. So you have guys like Vaughn or Turk or Forsberg or whoever it may be. They just nail content. So if you're a championship, you're going, well, these guys are doing it on their own platform and killing it. And in many ways, sometimes are bigger stars than the series itself. Whereas in
That's
Europe,
all relatively new, though, to be fair.
Yeah, and then in Europe, you have a lot of guys who are like really good drivers, but have absolutely no idea about media or where they're going or what sponsorship is, or I mean, have no idea.
How many
so
places?
What
Peter
we're trying to say is, we have to make characters of these guys because they may take some time to make characters of themselves. So it makes us a little bit more creative or pushy to go and try and sell that story of those drivers to the public. In Drift Masters also, I will say we cannot take all of that credit because there's a partnership there with Red Bull TV, and the guy who is directing those live streams was directing Formula One for 15 years. So he's like a guy with a huge amount of experience in motorsport and what keeps people entertained. And I would say the media team has now grown to probably 70 people that run that broadcast.
For Drift Masters, 70 people you have. And what were you running before at IDC? How many people do you think you had running the broadcast?
27
27 people. That's camera operators,
videographers, photographers, everything.
Okay, so let me ask you this: with your live stream, what kind of motivated you to start?
I'm saying 27 staff, and then if I was talking about a media team at IDC, we'd probably be talking 12 people, 13 people in total, I'd say.
And those are people that are supporting the live stream in some way.
That's a cameraman and a photographer for us and a videographer or whoever it may be, all inclusive. But that goes to about 70 when it comes to Drift Masters, because you have directors, producers, like graphics guys, a lot of guys doing drones and onboards and different things. So a lot of those guys are, so it's sort of our team and Red Bull TV put together and sort of everybody in their best position and concentrating on their best thing.
So how many cameras do you think you have on the ground, drone camera guys, do you have for the live stream, you think? How many different angles?
This weekend we'll have, you there?
Yeah, sorry, you broke up for 1 second.
Oh, I think we have about 16 cameras altogether.
It's a lot more.
If you include the onboards, which are 4 at a time, and then you have 2 drone guys, and then you have maybe 6 operators on the track. You've got a wireless camera for the pits. You've got a Starline camera. You've got a commentary box camera. You've got a judging camera, and you've got some height cameras, and you've got some general drone cameras, and then, yeah, lots of other bits and pieces.
Have you noticed a significant growth as far as interest or viewership by going the new route that you're going now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think from round 1 in Drift Masters this year, with the toys, as I call them, that were put on, you know, the onboards, I think were a big step in the right direction. You know, seeing the drivers' emotions in the car when the results are coming through, that kind of thing. Excuse me. And also, there is a full production that happens for 2.5 days before the broadcast. So the did you knows and the track guides and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the guys are working really hard for about 2.5 days to create all of these pieces of content for the intros and the outros of the shows. And I think having a television director there who, I'll be honest, doesn't really understand everything about drifting, but he knows what looks good and doesn't look good. It's actually a good thing because he's very harsh on, that's not interesting. I don't understand why that's happening. Let's make it clearer. There at Red Bull are more looking at it from, you know, the normal person on the street who comes across it can understand it very quickly. Whereas we, I think, as drift people, can sometimes be too protective of the hardcore, you know, kind of information and not the sort of the shiny stuff.
Well, also at the end of the day, too, I think being so into the drifting community, there are stories that we know about what's happening on track that these guys don't know about, but we don't know that we need to show that to make the people in the stands understand. And that's when the producer's like, yo, that's a great story. Make sure you get a camera on that. Or even the moments. You guys capture really good moments. And I like how you guys get both drivers out of the car because they get out, they high five, they hug, you pick a winner, boom. Somebody's in their face with the camera, capturing that emotion, getting their first words, back in the car and go. It's like, that little snippet is a really good moment. Or even you'll have a dude do a burnout in the burnout box, warm up, pull up the grid, doors open, goes in, hey, this is going to be one of the biggest challenges of your life. How are you preparing for this? And it's like you're catching that dude in such a unique moment that you're feeling more of that rawness. You know, you're feeling that immediate connection with these guys. And that's why I think you guys do such a good job, is because there's more impactful moments that you're just like, holy shit, you know, the story is so good. And I guess that's the advantage of having 70 people running around.
Yeah, and again, all of those people, some of them are from our side, some of them are from Drift Masters' side, some of them are from Red Bull side, but they all work as one cohesive team. And going into the future, we're developing things. So what's really funny this year is for me, say in the commentary box, I can see what the stuff that they're implementing, the technology for next year in my screen sometimes being tested, but nobody at home sees it. And it's pretty wild what they're developing behind the scenes in terms of telemetry, in terms of basically our aim is cohesively as Drift Masters is to make it a completely visual experience. So for example, the idea is to have it completely they're going to put 60 small satellites on the track instead of using GPS, which is kind of like the drift box stuff back in the day. They're going to measure all the cars, put sensors on all the cars. So a qualifying run will have like a computer game. You'll watch the guy go, and he'll light up his zones: green, orange, red, percentages, speed, angle will all come up on the screen, so that you'll be able to say. And obviously for commentators, it's great to reference that rather than, I think that was good or that wasn't. You can kind of see it happening. And we tested something at the last round where the commentators will be able to speak to the drivers in the cars before they leave the line. And then they'll be also able to speak to them afterwards if they've got an issue with the call or whatever it may be, to kind of keep it very interactive with the drivers.
That's awesome. And the is your telemetry going to be used for judging, or is it just for the fact of?
I think where we want it to be used as like a unit. I talk we as in there's a lot of people involved in these decisions, but we want it to be involved in qualifying only, simply because qualifying is a really random thing to pick out of a number or a score. It's probably the only part of drifting that really is kind of just made up. That is very, very, it's kind of like you can have a criteria, but it's so vague. Whereas a machine could do that in qualifying. I think there's too many variables in a battle. It would need to come down to a judge's decision, but they would have these as aids to look at and go, okay, he came in there way slower on that run than the last run, or it would spike their interest if they had a question. And I think the big thing they've had as an aid this year is that, I mentioned before, they have their own replay system. So instead of you sitting there watching them slow-mo something for 60 times to figure out what they're doing, you're off watching an interview while they're making that decision. So they can wind this kind of controller thing. They can choose between any of the 9 cameras, wind it back and forward themselves. So they're not watching 2 runs. They're just watching the piece of the run they want to figure out. And we're off doing something else on the show, so that the audience doesn't have to sit through that decision. So a lot of those little technological things have obviously been really challenging to do. And believe me, it is the most stressful environment I've ever been in drifting is Drift Masters. It is ridiculously stressful. And everybody is really, really like, it's not as fun, but because you're achieving something so kind of new and different and such a good product, that it's probably amazing at the end when you get that relief that it all worked out. So it's kind of more stressful, more hard work, a lot more moving parts, but I think people have been enjoying it. So we feel when people are enjoying it, that's the victory for us,
Definitely.
Yeah.
So kind of moving forward, I know it's kind of getting late by your time, but what should we look forward? What should we be looking forward to in the next year or so with Drift Games?
So with Drift Games, we're moving now to a completely lifestyle automotive brand in Ireland, which we've been kind of had such success in drifting. Pretty much the only thing that's been successful in the automotive realm is drifting. So this is probably something that you guys are unaware of, but drifting is like, if you combined every single track-based motorsport in Ireland and you multiplied all of their attendance by like 10 or 15, you'd have what drifting has. And that's including super bikes, everything. So drifting is sort of an anomaly in Ireland that it's been so successful. And we kind of want to start jumping into other genres and still bringing the drift element with us. So our headquarters is in the middle of a racetrack, which is very unusual. So we have a racetrack at our disposal. We have all these crazy Irish guys in crazy cars, be they drift cars, road cars, race cars. And we just want to make fun content, kind of pitting them all against each other. Very like a very amateur, probably terrible Top Gear with Irish people that just want to have a lot of fun. And it'll just be laughs all the way. Some non-competitive events. We're having a lot of bashes throughout the year where we have 2 days of just partying and drifting. Very like the grid life element, but on a smaller scale with the musical stuff. Enjoying ourselves, having a lot of fun. Everybody's included, not just the top guys or the bottom guys. Everybody's involved, and we'll obviously be supporting the championship as it continues. And again, I can't reveal too much about that side of things yet, but whoever continues it on, we will be supporting them. And I also want to go driving myself a little bit more, because when you run all the events, you can't compete in them. So it's nice when you can actually go and have some fun with the guys on the grid too, which is a big part of it for me.
You deserve it, dude. Fuck. No, you have such a unique story, and obviously we're all a big fan of yours, and you have a lot of big fans here in the United States too, man. I think we see that you're very passionate about drifting. Obviously, we know, a lot of the guys internally know that, a lot of people don't make money in this game, and a lot of people, sometimes struggle in this game. So a lot of these people over here have very much respect for you, especially in your innovation. You're very creative, and you're very willing to change things, which is keeping it fresh and keeping us American drifters on our toes, because in some cases you are setting the bar in some areas, and I have a feeling that obviously any idea or most ideas that you throw on the table end up getting legs and running, and I'm hoping that's what happened to Drift Games.
Well, what we want to do is collaborate with as many people as possible. I mean, we want to collaborate with everybody and anybody and just have fun with it. We're not territorial in any way. We're just trying to, wherever we go and whatever project we take on, we're going to give it our all and have a load of fun with it and try and be as creative. And anything we do, whether it's, from doing a championship to just, a practice day, we want to do it the best it can possibly be done. So where we go from here, again, I don't know. I've never known. It seems like I had this plan from the start. I have no idea how it's all come to this. I mean, I took like one event on and thought this was a big deal, and then, it all spiraled out of control. So we're taking a little reset. We're going to pick some new exciting projects. We're going to have a lot of fun with it. And as I said, never say never where you end up in the future. We could be anywhere, doing anything for anyone, with anyone. And I think that's the way we kind of want it to be, like sort of a new challenge.
Well, we've always wanted to get out. We've been trying to find excuses to come out to Ireland and party with you guys. Hopefully, Drift Games is going to be the excuse for us to get out there.
I don't need an excuse. I just want to enjoy the fine weather.
I'll give
the
you
beautiful
Dakar to go ripping Mondello with a bash.
Oh, I've so about last year I was talking to my buddy. I'm like, man, I would really love to ship my car out to Ireland for a weekend and go party at Modelo. But Drift Games is right up my alley, man. It definitely something I would love to do, and I'm going to try to do it next year. So we'll see.
Yeah, well, we've got some cars here. We've got some fun stuff. I even have a left-hand drive car. So if you guys want to come have a bit of fun in Ireland, you are welcome anytime.
I wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know what to do with my hands.
Burnout.
Yeah, we could
To be fair, I think, Sam, you've watched enough Mustangs go around corners at this stage that you surely could have an idea.
Yeah. You spend enough time with those maniacs, Sam, that you probably know more about Mustangs than all of us put together with the amount of time you sit in there
When you
setting
saw
up
the
camera.
cool photo of me as a 16-year-old with my Mustang. So, I mean,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you were a fucking hot dog.
thanks, bud.
Well, actually, one of the things, like what made you chose the name Drift Games? Because it sounds more like a more fun thing than a championship. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Well, that's the point. The Drift Games brand existed 2 years alongside IDC. So when IDC was running, Drift Games was already doing practice days, fun days, bashes, and a school where people learn how to drift. And we were doing some fun content with it and some merchandising. So in order, when we finished, we obviously built up a following on Drift Games. So when we were switching across from IDC, instead of starting from zero again, we decided to use the term Drift Games. We already had built that brand in Ireland. People knew what it was. So it wasn't a huge step into darkness. And it sort of came from the X Games, as in Drift Games, X Games. Every drift championship is called after something else in another sport that did well, and they just changed something in it. So to drift. So that's kind of what we did. And the name kind of stuck and the logo kind of stuck and people liked it in Ireland. It kind of was a fresh logo. So we wanted it to be a bit more lifestyle-y and this year, and it kind of worked.
yeah.
So I got one last personal question before we go to the
Here we
Instagram question.
go.
No, but it's like, so you as a commentator is awesome. I think you do a very specific play-by-play from to the greatest detail, and it's very, very entertaining. But it sounds like your commentary is only broadcast through the live stream. Is your live commentary also broadcasted to the live audience?
Not in any of the countries we are in Drift Masters other than Ireland.
So when you're announcing Ireland, you are broadcasting to the audience.
So next
as
week
well
the audience will hear me. In Germany, they have a German announcer, they have an Austrian announcer, French announcer, Polish announcer. So what we are funnily doing, if you think about it, is at the German round, when you hear us all screaming, me and Ian Waddington, my partner in crime in Drift Masters, it's a good friend of mine, we're in a small, almost toilet-like cubicle with a screen shouting at a wall.
And then person next to you have these crazy Germans doing the same thing, and the next down you have the Polish guys doing it. And...
Well, no, the Germans are out in the audience because they're obviously speaking to them.
Because they're okay, gotcha. Okay,
so we can hear them, and we don't know what they're talking about at all. But we're watching the live stream, so basically we're commentating on what you see at home. So it's interesting because this is the most interesting thing about our commentary that people don't realize is I have never once watched an actual drift run in real time in Drift Masters this year.
Really? You've just been in this
I'm looking
shed?
at a screen, and often, because of the nice shot of the track behind me, I'm looking the opposite way of the track at a screen. and I can hear the cars behind me, but I can't see them. So that was a bit of a challenge to get used to, but we kind of have it. We have it sussed now, I think.
Yeah.
See,
Do
I
you hate
always
it, though,
said-
not actually seeing it though. Like I feel like we've done our halftime show for FD this year remotely, and like I just grossly miss the smell and the sound and the vision of being there. And I guess you get a little bit of that, but it's like I don't like not seeing drifting in the flesh.
I completely agree, but
Yeah.
I think it's just because it's so loud and you're trying to have a very good audio on what you're doing. It's so loud and so kind of the people around you or whatever. But they kind of box us off simply because of, they want us to only focus on, because again, we're English commentary for an English stream. We should only be talking about what we can actually see on the stream.
Yep.
Because if we're talking about, hey, look at this guy with his dog over there, and you can't see him on the screen, it's kind of frustrating because you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't see it. It's like an in-joke that they're not involved in.
Yeah.
So we kind of say, hey, we'll just watch what everybody's watching. So we're reacting as you're reacting at home, if you know what I mean.
See, I've always sensed that, and that's exactly why I asked that, is because it just felt, it is so precise that it had to be either in front of a monitor or something, because every little play-by-play that you do is very relative to what is happening on screen. And I caught that, I was like, fuck, they're really good, or they're really in sync with the camera guy. There's some dude yelling at him the entire time. But it was very precise, and I noticed that. And that's, I think, what makes your commentary so good, is that it is reacting off of what we're seeing too, not just a generalization of seeing everything that is happening on track, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's very noticeable.
You also have a director in your ear the entire time,
Yep.
which is a very big challenge, shouting at you all the time of where to go to and what to do and what to look at. But he also prompts you about what's about to be shown, so you can build it up a little bit too of what you're about to see, or if you're going to a replay or not, or whatever. So it does make me seem a lot more professional than I probably am, which is good. And me and Ian kind of are on a play-by-play in the background, and we sort of seem like geniuses at times about predicting what's going to happen, but sometimes we're fed that information. So it's all part of the magic.
I'm a big fan of your commentary, and that's why I say that, is because it is very emotional. I think everything you do, between the excitement or the the letdowns or the crowd, there's a very a vocal connection to everything that you're doing, and just once again the storytelling they do, very, very good. I use a lot of the inspiration for any type of commentary that I do, because you do such a phenomenal job, and I really pay attention to that stuff.
And I think
David,
the thing about
David's a
Ian
big
doing
inspiration to me because he does such a fucking good job.
But me and Ian are genuinely the biggest drift fan nerds in the world, and we genuinely spend the day walking the pits, finding out everything about the drivers, making sure, hearing all the stories. So then when you get to that vital moment, this guy had his wheel come off in practice, or he did this, or something happened, or here's the journey he's had, or I think that's very important of building the characters of those drivers. And again, sometimes I think, because you're commentating for so long at a drift event, and I'm sure Jared and Ryan will know about this, it just kind of goes on for a long time, you sort of go a bit mad and you forget that you're commentating, and you're just kind of talking what you're seeing, and it almost comes out a bit more emotional, which sometimes is a good mix.
Yeah. Incredible, dude. All right, so I say let's get to some Instagram questions so Dave can continue working for the next 12 hours.
We have a
We've
lot.
got some more super chats we got to hit. First two. Let's earlier in the show, SN95 Kookie says, does he think that FD should run the Pro-Am too?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you think Formula Drift should run all the Pro-Am organizations out here, or have more involvement in it?
I think, in my personal opinion, which is whatever it counts for in America, it would be a case of, I do think maybe it needs tighter regulation across everything, or sort of to be. The problem is, if you're running such a beast like Formula Drift, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine Ryan or Jim have any time left to try and run another 10 things. So I think you're in a position where not do you need Formula D to go help all those guys. I think it just needs a little bit more cohesiveness between everybody, maybe. And again, the biggest problem you guys have is it doesn't seem to be in America a very common thing that somebody comes up through the ranks and becomes a star. So whatever the issue with that is, and I don't know what that is, or where they learn, or is it the nurturing nature, but they need to find a way of making American young stars of drifting, and I think that's very important for a national pride in your series. So not that these stupid Europeans come over and win everything.
That is brilliant.
We've got faith in some youngins coming up through the Pro 2 ranks right now. So,
but you
we'll
also
see
have to
how
remember that like if you look at Ireland, for example, like I'm pretty sure Irish drifting existed before Formula Drift, and so did Japanese drifting. So
How
there's
dare
still
you.
quite amount of time.
Drifting was born in America, my friend. The word toge is so that was formed in Alabama when one dude accused one of the other guy's foot of being homosexual.
I've heard that story.
Yeah.
Here's another question. What do you have drivers that you like watching in Formula Drift?
I mean, I watch every Formula Drift event, and it's funny.
And you
for me
can't pick your superstars either. You can't pick James because we already know those are your purebred.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick James Dean or Dean Carney. Who are my favorite drivers in Formula Drift? I am a big fan of. I know one of the guys in the office is a huge fan of Matt Kaufman. He thinks he's got the most amount of style when it comes to building cars.
Okay.
So he's a big fan of.
Cat Mothman.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of. Who would I think is like very? I mean, Forrest Wang. Obviously, we've had Forrest Arnold. I think his style is fantastic to watch. I think he's good. To be honest, I think I've always been a big fan of Chris Forsberg myself.
Yep.
I know he gets a lot of slack because he's so good, but I think when it comes to a consistent professional and a nice guy and a really good ambassador for the sport, I think he's been really good. And I would be almost in awe of Vaughn's marketing, to be honest, as well. I think everything he does is just so cool.
What interests you more? Do you look at some of the drivers and like, fuck, he nailed the marketing game? Like, do you dig deep?
Great ambassadors for the sport.
Do you dig deep into some of the drivers' personal marketing campaigns? Like, fuck, that guy's doing such a good job.
Oh,
like, because he's a promoter, so I can imagine. Yeah, you watch the stuff on track, but it's like, does the stuff off track interest you as much?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the guys that are in Formula Drift, I'm like, God, if I had that guy now in my championship, he's so easy to promote, and they almost do it effortlessly. I think it's a very American thing, though. American people, I'm not being stereotypical, but it's they can be quite more outspoken and confident on a camera and stuff like that. If you look at Irish people generally, they're quite reserved and humble and that kind of stuff. And there's a big difference in that kind of stuff. So, I think, to be honest, there's a lot of guys in Formula Drift that marketing wise, I'm like, are just nailing it. Like, they're bigger stars than drifting itself.
See, but that's what comes with population here in the United States is now you have a marketing race because everybody's now a Formula Drift driver. Everybody's a Pro 2 driver. So where's the next race going to be? It's like, who can win the marketing game? And that's the other challenge to this is who's going to be on top with the content creation. And that just recently started probably within the past 3 or 4 years where it's like, oh shit, somebody put out a banger video. I have to top that. Or I have to do something different to find my niche and sell myself. So it's becoming this whole other ordeal. And then what it turns into is that's your sponsorship proposal as well. It's like, imagine if you had 20 IDC drivers, it's like you have 20 people only competing for sponsorships, but now you have hundreds of people competing for sponsorship. So we're not just selling Formula Drift eyeballs. We're selling, oh, by the way, we did 12 million views last year on YouTube, where our social media gain is now 160,000 total viewers. We did 1.5 million downloads. So now it's like, because I'm competing against other people that are doing something similar. If we were all just to sell Formula Drift drivers that were all Formula Drift drivers, nobody would probably be getting any money because 100 people would be asking for the same thing. And that race just recently started. So I'm sure as you develop more drivers out in your area, you're going to start experiencing the same exact thing.
Although I will make a small prediction on what I think will happen with US drifting in the next 2 or 3 years and what might be the biggest influence. And I think that is the influencers. I think it's the Adam LZs and the TJ Hunts and those guys. If they go and start competing and getting good, they can bring so much audience to the sport because they've already created it. So I think when you talk about marketing, those guys getting into the sport and wanting to do it for the right reasons, as in being a competitor and testing their skills, I think it'll make a big difference in popularity.
I'll tell you something really crazy. So I've met Adam a few times, but I've never seen him at a Formula Drift event before. And this year I actually saw him at Grid Life Midwest. And I roll up, he rolls up in his rig, and he's on the right side of the paddock. Vaughn is on the left side of the paddock with Chelsea. I walk around the corner, and LZ has a line of people literally wrapping around his trailer all the way down the pits, almost down to the entrance. Vaughn probably had 50% or 25% of the audience that LZ had. Yeah. Even though this is his first year in Formula Drift, he's doing okay, mediocre for a first time, which is expected. But the amount of people that guy had around his fucking trailer was absolutely incredible. I was like, holy shit, he's sitting in next to a 2-time Formula Drift champion, has one of the coolest activations in Formula Drift, 2 trailers, 10 cars, Chelsea, and this kid has 100, 200 people sitting in line waiting for an autograph.
But can you imagine a championship where you line up all on one side, all of the OGs, like, your Turks, your Forsbergs, your Vaughns, all these guys. And on the other side, you line up all your YouTube sensation guys on your left. And you put them head to head in a championship. Everybody in the world to watch that.
Oh, 100%.
And the YouTubers would fucking crush, but it'd be fun.
Here's another thing too, that I know there's a lot of hate with those guys as being, influencers first, then drivers second. But the thing is, the event, especially like looking at from a promoter's eyes, when you have someone with that type of following before they even get into your organization or into the sport, there is so much more they bring to the table than the average driver. I'm not talking about skill. I'm not talking about the actual car setup or anything. But that opens a whole new audience and a whole new section for your entire organization to be in with their channel.
For sure.
It's, I mean, there's so many people that are like, oh, he's a fake driver. He doesn't care about this or whatever. You know what? If the dude likes to drive, and he's got, 2.5 million subscribers now on his channel or something crazy like that, why wouldn't you want him to drive? Like, it's the only thing that's going to do is benefit everyone, especially the people that he's driving against. There are people that probably have been driving for 10, 15 years. A lot of people still don't know who they are.
So real talk on that real quick, just real talk. LZ almost didn't get his license because they didn't want Formula Drift to look like they're just handing it out because of his media. They want people to compete in the series that are passionate about competing, but also have the ability to compete at that level. Which is totally respectable, because you don't want somebody to, I got 2.5 million drivers, but I only drifted 4 times, right? You don't want Formula Drift to say, okay, yeah, come on in.
You don't want that element at an event, I would say, in terms of just letting people on popularity, do. But again, it's drifting. Popularity does not drive the car. Yeah, so at the end of the day, if Adam LZ is in Pro 1 and he doesn't qualify at every event, well, it's content for him, and it might, again, he might win the thing. I'm not saying he's not a driver.
Absolutely.
I'm just saying that, what you want is people to follow the sport. And I think anybody that's, and I'm sure anyone hates on anybody that's got success. Again, if someone's got success for a long period of time in drifting, they'll eventually start to build up more fans and more haters. It's just the way it works. But at the same time, this YouTube thing and all these guys following, there's probably more people that follow Adam LZ, watching him do whatever he does, than actually know really what drifting is. So if he brings those people in, I don't think there's been a moment where someone has come along, taken that many people and said, hey, come with me, check this thing out. Yep. So, I mean, if FD had to give him a license because they felt it was good for the sport, because it would bring more popularity to the sport, that's the only thing that matters. And I think people get too caught up in the politics of it. If he brings that many people to the sport, that brings more sponsors to the sport, that brings more money, that makes a better show. So everybody benefits.
Yeah, I mean, especially the other drivers. Like, if they actually do go against this guy and they beat him, and here's his sponsor saying that he's a good driver, and the other guy takes him out, I mean, what is that going to showcase to the people that support him? That's just more and more leverage for the other drivers to get more stuff. It's more spectators for you when you're promoting your events. Everyone just wins.
Exactly. And I think anything that brings something special or something new to the sport is, I mean, you look at Pro 2, I would imagine, and I know, Link Engine Management, who are our partners here, working with Pro 2 and doing good things there. But LZ has been a revelation for that. I can imagine if you were to look at the viewership figures from Pro 2 last year to this year, there's probably a lot on his side of things that has, people tuning in. And that should be great for all of the Pro 2 drivers to say, now we've got a new audience. They're not just going to watch LZ's run and turn off. They're going to watch the event or watch what happens. So it's a great thing. And I think that people should embrace things like that. I think people should embrace anybody who wants to come into the sport that has a following, whether they're into basketball, whether they're into anything. Cross promotion is the key to getting it out to new audiences. And I think if I was to give my philosophy on drifting at the moment is everybody's spending too much time trying to please everybody that already knows what it is, when they should be spending way more time trying to get people that don't know what it is to watch it.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that's what he brings to the table. I mean, I know this has been covered a bunch of times, but one of the things that really stood out to me was some of my friends that listened to T-Pain found out drifting through him. They had no idea what it was, and then all of a sudden he's posting his car up, and they're like, "Hey man, is this the stuff that you're into or whatever?" And I'm thinking like, I've been posting my stupid cars over the last how many years on social media, and never once did they ask that question. Some dude that raps, that has millions of followers, that's been around for years and years, never posted anything before like that in his life. Next week, after he posted something up, they're asking me that question.
For sure, and I think Hoonigan have done a massive amount of work to get people from different genres to start respecting, drifting as a sport. I think they've done an amazing job as well. So, I mean, the thing is, it's all on the up. I mean, Hoonigan's on the up, Adam LZ's on the up. I'm sure Formula D's numbers are on the up. A lot of good drivers on the grid. I mean, drifting is in a very strong place at the moment, but I think what we're all sitting here thinking is, where does it go next and how does it go up another 10 notches? And I think it's going to come from the outside influence, and I think it's going to come from the community getting behind the drivers and the championships and pushing them positively rather than trying to tear them down because they assume they're already successful. If you're trying to tear something down, you've assumed it's got to its peak. I think there's much more peaks available for everybody in the future. So it's kind of my philosophy on it. I think it's still a fun time. It's a new time for drifting. It's very media based and stuff, and kids can come out of nowhere and be super.
Sorry, I lost you for like the last 3 seconds.
So hey, Dave, what time is it over by you right now?
It is nearly 4:00 in the morning.
Oh my God!
Hey, let's just hit him with 2 or 3 Instagram questions. Let's send this man on his way back into the future.
You guys find those questions. I'm going to finish up the super chats. Connor People says, "Will Dave be competing at King of the Cone?"
So in Ireland, there's a thing called King of the Cone, which is essentially people doing donuts around a cone. That's pretty much what it is. But they have this ongoing.
Make it sound so fun.
They have this ongoing banter with us, or like a joke with us, and it's a very friendly thing. But it's like, they're saying this is the real sport. This is real car control, and we're saying drifting is. So there's always this thing of me going. I always say that it's like a stupid thing, and they're like, "Well, come and compete at it." So I said next year I would definitely go compete at it just for fun.
And what are your whips again? What do you whip out when it's time to whip it out?
For that, you can only really use really terrible cars because you can't turn up with like a drift car. So it's got to be like a Lexus, like GS or IS or something with a welded diff that's pretty awful, or something like that. Or they generally have A86s for it here. But okay. I have 3 drift cars at the moment. I have the Mustang, Vaughn's old Mustang, and I have 2 180SXs that are both SR20, which blow up all the time. So that's space.
I've definitely done that.
Yeah, I've gone through a lot of SR20s when I would try to buy a simple, reliable car, and the one car out of the 3 that gives me no issue is the Mustang with 900 horsepower.
Yeah, go figure. And then we got one from Paul Velichkov, long-time listener, first-time listener. Dave, how do you see Nate and Nathan and Sam getting along? I don't know who Nathan or Nathan is.
So Nathan is a guy we hired a comedian to do our pit reporting. So the job of Lorette. Mm-hmm. We just decided to hire a comedian that knew nothing about drifting at all, really. Mm-hmm. And he sort of had mixed reviews because he was quite funny, but then he didn't know what was going on. But he's really improved over the last year or two. And he's a character. He's a one of a kind, He's a different type of character than everybody else in drifting. And he just sort of does his thing and winds people up and has fun. It's just a different approach we went with of like, we're quite serious commentators. This guy is just kind of, playing the idiot. And again, I think that's what they're referring to your nickname and how you guys.
Yeah, I like that idea. I wish someone would let me pick on the drifters in the pits.
That would be amazing.
All right, and then I think that's it for our supers. You got some instas lined up?
I got one, and we can make it a short one. This is Protomore. He asks, where do you feel drifting is going wrong, and what needs to be done to make it better? If you can answer that in just a sentence or two.
I think that's exactly the problem with drifting is people thinking it's going wrong.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you go back 10 years, you turn on a Formula Drift event, and you tell me how wrong it's come since then, and you see Peter and James on that bank in Urbandale. And that battle and all those battles that you see in the top 8 now did not exist 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they were 6 car lengths apart, and people were falling out of the stands in excitement. and now they're smashing doors every run.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with drifting, and I think it's the opposite way of looking at it. There's a lot right, and push on the right, double down on the right stuff, and stay away from the wrong stuff, and I think it'll be fine. I wouldn't think
It always blows my mind when everyone's like, drifting is over. Ugh, can't believe it. It's finally over.
Do you
Drifting's gone downhill.
do you guys have like this big issue with grassroots versus professional drifting in Ireland? Does that exist out there yet? Or?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay. So we all kind of experience
And to me, it's like, I don't understand how it's like, somebody plays football with their friends in the park. They don't go, fuck the Champions League. They just go, we're just playing football in the park. That's what we do. And then,
I like the idea of a guy doing that, though.
And just going, professional footballers are all idiots. This is the real shit. And then, the professional footballers are earning their money going with thousands of people watching going, this is much more stressful than playing in the park. So that, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of hilarious, though, considering someone wearing, just playing football in the park and screaming, fuck the professionals. This is the real shit. Because, whereas I think there's some professionals that might say that, yeah, playing in the park is more fun. I don't think there's many people playing in the park and be like, fuck the pros. It's a weird thing that happens in drifting.
It's a completely unique idea to drifting, I think, that people say, screw the professional people that are really good at getting paid at this.
Yeah. I don't know. Whatever.
I got one more just because you may have a good answer for this, and then we'll let you go.
Jonathan
Eli asked, where does he see drifting going, especially for the younger drivers like Adam Zelwiski and Connor Shanahan?
Well, I mean, these are two guys that compete in, if your audience don't know. So Adam's the young Polish superstar, and Connor's obviously the young Irish superstar. Yeah. Those guys are going to go big because the thing about European drifting is it's never had big sponsorships or big companies behind it. It never had a platform like Drift Masters that was consistent and as top quality as Formula Drift was to offer these drivers a platform to offer something to those sponsors. Right. Now, Connor has just signed a deal with Red Bull. So, the sky is the limit with that. He's 16 years of age, signed a deal, an athlete deal with Red Bull. And Zalewski, he's got some big interest from big companies as well, Polish kid. And these guys are super talented. I think they're both, 16 and 18. And the thing is that they're the next generation of superstars. They're already sponsored to do what they do, and now they're picking up more. So again, the biggest thing is, I think what people have to realize in drifting, and if they've never been a professional drifter, is that you have to make incredible sacrifices. And if you're young, your family, a lot of people will say, oh, they come from money and they just got money. The Shanahans, while Connor Shanahan in a week's time will rock out in his Red Bull can and his big car, his dad is probably still on the road tonight picking up €100 scrapped cars to bring them to scrap yards. That's how much work they put into that. So there is no easy success in drifting, no matter how much people like to make themselves feel better by saying there is, or people are just lucky. There is no luck. So those guys are working hard and their families are working hard, and the gambles seem to be kind of paying off. So when I say to young people, I'm like, if you want to be a professional drifter like Connor Shanahan, there's nothing stopping you except just absolutely putting everything into it. So everyone that's every driver in Ireland that's fully committed, left school, said, this is what I want to do, they're all in Drift Masters now.
That's awesome.
Awesome. I think
Paco,
that's it. What do you got, Paco?
Yeah, Paco's got some stuff.
Yeah, I have a question from first-time caller, username Harodeanda.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, we don't need to
Wait,
pump
what?
Jared's request for... All right, give Jared his request for free.
He's asking, when is Dave Egan having me to Ireland, which is number one of my countries to visit?
I would welcome Jared anytime. He's an awesome guy. I think, again, he's
Until
the guy
he's
that
gotta
started
pay
the
for it.
whole commentary thing. I think next year we should bring him over to one event and have me and Jared do an event together for fun, and just have it as a not super serious event that we could actually have some fun with it.
That's iconic. Awesome. David.
When's Jared going to have me to Formula D so I can shout at him in the tower?
Ooh,
Yeah, that's the
call
question
out.
that we all
I
wanna know.
would support that message a million times over. Dude.
Travis, guest announcer for one round one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just come in and just say, James Dean,
Yeah.
I was there.
You have to practice. Yeah, well, you also have to practice. Chris Forsberg gets a win. That's
Yep.
that's a
Okay.
classic.
That's like 101.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, doctor.
Oh, doctor.
That's another one.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question before we go. It's a really important one from Macho Man Randy Sanchez. He's a veteran of these here parts.
Yeah.
And he has a very important question, which is, would you rather get bit on the face by a horse or eat an entire horse?
That's a great question.
Really important.
I think I'd rather get bitten on the face. I don't think I could eat an entire horse. I think that would get painful. I
The
think
hooves. The hooves are the hardest part.
if you get bitten, it's just one instant pain. I think eating a horse could take about 3 to 4 days.
Yeah, but it rips your entire face off, and you don't have a face the rest of your life.
No, it's not that bad. Like, might be a nice horse, Sam.
That's
would
what
have
Macho
You
just
have
texted me.
to-
He said that you get your entire face ripped off clean by this angry horse.
Sam, come on.
Mm.
Then
Or-
let's not go down this. Let's not go
Yeah,
down.
but you got to eat the hooves. Do you start with the hooves or do you end with the hooves?
I think you'd finish. I think you'd hope by the end of that you'd have just eaten yourself to death, and you wouldn't.
Now,
have
where
to
do you?
Start with the most delicious part.
Well, here's the other question: where do you eat the teeth? Do you eat those near the hooves? And what are you gonna do with that big horse dick? You gonna fucking start with that thing, or do you save that as a dessert?
What?
You'd be on the hooves for a while. You'd have a long time eating the hooves to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I would do, Sam, is I would turn the
I think
teeth.
I'm going back to the face ripped off again now. I think I'm going to go back to the horse.
Yeah, what would you do with that big horse hog? And then you turn the teeth into a necklace, Sam. You would have a fucking nice horse necklace when you're done eating that thing.
All right. Well,
I
this
think
is
there's enough
better.
technology in surgeons now that if your face was bitten off by a horse, you'd have some solution.
Yeah, this is a great time to thank our sponsors too. So let's thank
I'll take Viagra.
Link ECU. You see Dave wearing the hat.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Link ECU. Of course, we mentioned them on the show many times organically, but they also are supporters of the show. Grid Life, thank you, boys. At
Yep.
Grid Life, we just wrapped up our Atlanta event. Looking forward to the next season. There's many big things to come, and of course, we got to thank AM Intakes, our ground, our base, our baby boys. AM, thank you guys. Corey, Paco, anything else?
Our
from you
Patreons.
guys?
Yep.
Patreons,
Thank our
baby.
Patreons because
Patreones.
it is the Patreones who pretty much they're the ones carrying the weight of this show. You know what I'm
You
saying?
know, and what we mean by carrying the weight is giving us the large houses we live in.
Yeah.
Our fridge is stocked with delicious
Claw.
wines and expensive jewelry. In our
Jesus.
it's just
Expensive
thank you
White
guys
Claw.
for just giving us this lifestyle
White
we've always dreamed
Claws.
of.
Yep. And obviously thanks Big Balls for manning the control room. He's been killing it today. And I'm not gonna thank Robert for being here because he's just been laughing.
Yeah, I'm just basically crashing on his couch for the night.
Good shit.
Very good.
Dave, thanks
Dave.
again for everything you do.
Thanks,
Yeah,
My
David.
pleasure, guys.
And what, real quick, what do we have to look forward to from you? Do you have anything to plug? Do you have any sponsors? What do you want to say?
Next week is my last event that I'm running in Ireland, and it's the biggest, most expensive, and most ridiculous event we've ever run. It's on a track that I think is probably going to destroy all the cars, and there's people from 26 countries competing, and it's ridiculous. It's already almost sold out. It's going to be the biggest event in Irish history, and it's 2 days.
Okay.
Saturday is the final of the Irish Championship. Sunday is Drift Masters. 2 days, and it's going to be crazy action. So check that out. Get you warmed up for the finals in FD. It's going to be a good end of year here next week. Good party.
How, where, when do we tune in?
It will be on the Saturday on the Drift Games Facebook page and YouTube channel. And then on the Sunday, it will be Drift Masters Facebook page and Red Bull TV.
And
This
we'll
coming
make sure to
weekend
share it.
or the following one?
The following weekend.
Gotcha. So in 9 days ish.
9 days-ish, yeah.
Yep. We'll make sure to share that and get that out. But thanks again, you guys, and we'll see you next week.
See you next Tuesday, guys.
See you
Thanks
in
for tuning,
IBC.
and you guys have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Send us to Oblivion, Brian. Good night, everybody.
Night.